All right, how's it going, everyone? So for today's video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you the rundown of aligning a vehicle on a Hunter alignment rack. We're just going to do a basic alignment for this video. I'll go into more in-depth alignments in a future video, but this will be just how to set the alignment rack up. We're using a Hunter Hawkeye Elite in this particular video. Now you may have another type of alignment rack that might have different processes, but I'm just going to give you the rundown on this particular alignment rack and how you're going to attach the service heads and make adjustments according to that. So we have a 2002 Honda Accord V6 that we're going to be using as our test vehicle. The things you need to do beforehand is you need to make sure that all of the suspension components, bushings, ball joints, control arms, tie rod ends, all of those components are not worn out and sorted out. Bad lower ball joint can cause the vehicle to have irregular wear and irregular alignment settings. Those problems need to be fixed first and foremost. The next thing we need to do is we need to not only make sure we have good quality tires, which we have a set of fairly new tires on it. They all need to be the same size. I also personally like to have the same brand, so these are all Michelins that are on this particular vehicle. They're all the same size and they're the same age roughly. After that, we then make sure that the tire pressure is set to our door placard, which I've already done, but you can find the door placard when you open the car door. You'll have the placard for what the tire pressure is supposed to be set at. So we're supposed to be set cold pressure at 30 psi. Our tires are all set to that. So then at this point now we can begin our alignment process. So with this particular alignment rack, we need to have it placed onto the locks. We also need to make sure we have the lasers set. Once the vehicle is at its work height, we can't touch the lasers or we can't touch the lift. The car has to be stationary. So we're gonna lift the vehicle onto the lift and get it onto the locks. So with that last click, I know that all the locks are engaged and I've heard a click from all four corners. So I'm gonna lower it down onto the locks, and you make sure, just give it kind of an eye up to make sure that you're even. As these flat alignment racks age or have a lot of use, the locks can get a little worn and you can have a corner that's a little low. So it's really important to make sure you're at the right level. You want to make sure the car is pretty level on the rack and straight, as well as our turn plates are level and straight under the vehicle. So at this point now we're at our working height. Our lasers are set. We don't want to move any of these components at all. So this is where the car is going to be worked on, which does mean, you know, you're going to have to go in and out of the vehicle. So you need it high enough to where you can get on through a couple of airline stairs to get up to the vehicle, but also work under it. So you kind of have to crouch down and make some adjustments for your comfort in that matter. But this is a good working height for what we're going to be doing. Basically for this particular vehicle, we're going to be just changing the toe, and that's about it. So from here then we're going to attach the heads. Now these alignment heads have a position. So if you look on this one, we have the white highlighted areas where this is supposed to be. So this is going to be the left front, or the driver front. So we can see alignment head number 2, left rear, right front, so on and so forth. We also have these snap onto the outside of the wheel. So we have a couple different options. Red arms are the mid-size arms. So these are good to about 33-inch tall tires. They might be a little bit big for what we're dealing with. We can then step down to the blues, which is for standard passenger cars. And then if we have really large vehicles, you have these black arms, and the black arms can actually, you can loosen this jam nut and extend them out even farther. There's also wheel adapter extenders for if it's a dually, and so on and so forth. So we're gonna try to test fit the red one, and if those are gonna be too big, then we'll put on the blue set. All right, so after doing an initial test fit, I found the blue arms are gonna fit best for this application. These are not very tall tires, or they're stock size 205 65/15, so they're relatively small in terms of tires, especially for nowadays. So the way that this works is these blue arms are gonna grip against the actual tread of the tire, and you want to try to line up the center line of this pivot point with the center line of the wheel. It doesn't have to be perfect and exact, it just has to be close. You also want to make sure that these lock arms are parallel with the lift. When we roll forward to do our roll compensation, it'll be off-centered, but to install them, they need to be lined up here. We also need to make sure the center line of the wheel lines up with one of these two stickers. Now, my rack here is pretty worn, but there's a blue one for the blue arm, red for the red, and then a black sticker right here for if it's larger, and it goes actually to this full extent if it's the larger black arms, and that's where the wheel center line needs to be able to get the wheels centered properly onto the turn plates. So what I'll do now is I'll go through and attach all of these alignment heads. So to install these again, you're going to try to center it off the wheel, make sure that the arms are parallel, and then hit down on that locking tab, and now the head's nice and adjusted and where it's supposed to be. So we're parallel with the deck and we're roughly center line. All right, so what I've done now is I've started a new repair order in the computer system. It's basically anything that's a dark highlighted area you have to have filled out. So we don't have to have the personal information of street stuff. You can if you want. Your particular shop or your situation, that's probably a good idea. Makes it nice and formal. But repair order number, name, I just put the vehicle, which I spelled wrong, and then license plate, as well as the technician number, mileage, and the year of the vehicle, and you do the last 2 digits of the year. So there's a 2002, so you put 2000 or 02. So from here you can scan the VIN. This unfortunately has not been working on our alignment rack, so I'm going to go through and manually select the vehicle. So we're going to scroll down to Honda. We have an Accord, and our year range is going to be 2002. So we'll pick that one, 98 to 02, press OK, and then now automatically the roll compensation will come up. So we saw these bars turn green, all 4 of them really quick. What that's indicating is that's indicating that the lasers are able to see these cameras, so we have them mounted correctly. Now the vehicle's in neutral right now, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to roll it forward while watching the screen. And once all those are in the green, I'm gonna block this. We're good with the roll compensation. So at this point, what we're gonna do is we're gonna do a caster sweep. Now, you do have to get in and press the brake pedal as well as put it back in park. But where we're at now is the vehicle is now centered on our turn plates. So once I get it in park, I'm going to then unpin the turn plates by pulling these pins out so that the tires can turn left and right. All right, so at this point, we're gonna follow the prompts. I've installed the brake pedal depressor, and I'm gonna steer the wheels as directed. So if you look, we're in the red right now. We're trying to get the tires turned into the green. As I turn the wheels, you'll be able to see it go into the green, and this full tire will turn green as well. It's best to have this with the vehicle running to aid in power steering, so have the vehicle on so you have the power steering assist helping you. Now, one of the other things I wanted to point out, to where if you have a camera issue, if I stand in front of the camera, you get this message. Now this message is target is not found by camera. So if you hit view target, this will give you why it's not working, and you can see why. So you can't really see it, it's not coming up on screen very good, but I'm blocking it. So if I unblock it, all of the cameras come up normal and the process then restarts. So what I'll do now is I'll start turning the wheel. I'm going to turn the wheel slowly, and we're going to watch. It's going to be kind of tough to see because I'm far away, but it's going to bing that we're green. So now we're going to turn the other way. We're turning to the right now. Now it's going to have us return back to center, which this one's kind of the finite one that you got to be really careful with. From here, what we'll do is we will lock the steering wheel in place with a steering wheel lock. So all this is a spring-loaded rod that's going to hold the steering wheel in place while we do our adjustments. So we'll get down from the vehicle, close the door, and then look at our bar graph. All right, so at this point, we've roll compensated and done a caster sweep. So all of our initial measurements have been made, and we can start to make adjustments on the vehicle. Now this rack the Hunter alignment rack has a couple different options. We can do express aligner, which will do it pretty much automatically for you. We'll wait for the guys at the Lambo dealer to quiet up. The nice thing about working at a dealership next to an exotic dealership is you get to hear some really nice cars occasionally. So we can go right to adjust toe, and this will go right through our main adjustments. Anytime you're aligning a vehicle, you always start with the rear first. These cameras pick up off the axle being straight in the back primarily, so you always start in the rear. So we're going to start with rear camber caster and then rear toe. To be able to find out if that's adjustable on your vehicle, you can go to bar graphs and we can look at our overall settings. So if we look at our front measurements right now, our camber is pretty good. We're in the green. Just because it's in the green though doesn't mean that it's good. So we can see we have negative half a degree on this side, and we're negative 0.1 of a degree on the left side. That doesn't necessarily mean the vehicle's going to drive straight. We want to make sure our total camber is in. Same with caster and same with toe. We are slightly out on the right side toe, which will make that adjustment, but we're going to go to the screen down here at the bottom for our rear. Now our thrust angle, this is going to be the angle that the rear axle is going to take as it tracks down the road. If it's positive, it's going to the left slightly. If it's negative, it's going to the right. Now our total toe is pretty close to straight, but our individual toe is out slightly. Now Hunter has made it a little bit easier for us. So for adjusting this, if we hit the little wrench, it brings up menu options, and we can show vehicle specifications. So that's going to show what our maximum and minimum specifications are. So for the left toe, we want no more than 0 degrees out or 0.16 degrees positive, and preferred it wants it dead center in the middle. To check and see where it's adjustable, if we hit illustrate adjustments, it will actually bring up, and it'll bring up a nice colored photo most of the time of where the adjustment is. So our eccentric is right here. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to adjust this to be able to bring this toe rod out, to bring the toe in or out as needed. So this is a nice feature that this does have. Now if there isn't an alignment angle that's adjustable, it'll come up as this. So this can be very common. So if we had an issue with camber in the rear, that's not adjustable, unfortunately. So that may require eccentric bolts for the coilovers or for the McPherson strut style design suspension. It all depends. So what we're going to start with now is we're going to adjust the rear. We're going to get each side rear toe in place, and hopefully we won't disturb our total toe. All right, so we're in the back left, and I'm going to adjust toe on that. If you can just barely see, I've moved the computer screen over and zoomed in on the left rear, which we're 0.2 of a degree out. To move that, we're going to move this eccentric. Now this eccentric consists of an egg-shaped washer that goes in between these large tangs. Now what you're going to do is you're going to loosen up this 17 mil, but to make the adjustments you're going to turn the 14 mil on this other side here. Let me see if I can get a light on there. This 14 mil to actually make the adjustments. So I've already loosened it up a little bit, and then we're going to make the adjustments and see if we can get that within spec. So I'm going to hold the 14 in, loosen the 17, and then now what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this eccentric. You can actually see the washer moving, and what that does is, if you can see right now I'm in the red over there, hopefully you can be able to see it. It's going to be kind of small, but I can move it and get in the green. So what we're aiming for is we're aiming for right in the middle. So we're going to go for 8/10, which is where we're at right now. I'm going to hold the 14 wrench while I then tighten up the 17 nut so that I can get this eccentric locked down. Alright, so we got that snugged down. Now at this point we'll adjust the right side and then move to the front. So with our right rear toe where we want it, we can then go back to our rear screen. So now what we're looking at is our camber stays the same, not adjustable on this particular vehicle, but our toe for each individual side is within specs, and that has brought our total toe to be straight as well. So that's a good sign, because we adjusted both sides toe, we haven't affected the total toe. That's usually a good indication, if you haven't already checked, that nothing's bent or out of place and that rear end is where it's supposed to be. So now at this point we'll move on to our front measurements. Now as you saw on the screen before, our front toe was in spec and just barely out on the right side. Now we're out, and again that's going off of what the alignment rack is taking the whether or not the front is straight off of the rear. So you always start with the rear and then do the front adjustments. So our camber and caster are good, so that's not anything to be really concerned about. So we'll do our toe adjustment and then go from there. All right, so to adjust our front toe, it's a little bit different than the back. The back we had eccentrics. On the front, we're going to be lengthening or shortening the tie rod end. So we're gonna loosen up the jam nut for the outer tie rod and turn the inner tie rod in or out depending on what our adjustments need to be. Most steering racks are going to have some sort of flat area to be able to hold the tie rod to break this bolt loose. So in the case of this Honda, this is a 17mm flat end. Our jam nut's a 19mm, and then there's a pair of flats for adjusting the inner tie rod that's going to be a 14mm. It's usually best to try to use the correct size tool every time you're doing this so that you don't round something off. I've already hit this with some penetrating oil to try to break that loose a little bit easier, so now I'm going to remove the jam nut and then start making our adjustment. All right, so with our jam nut loosened off, we can take it a couple threads out so that we have some free range of motion, and then we can use our 14mm to turn the inner tie rod in and out. So what we're going to be looking for is we're going to be looking for getting our toe in the right spot. So we'll move click on this so that we can get our adjustment. So I'm moving the tie rod out a little bit to give us some more positive toe. And we're shooting for that middle spot. Now one of the things that is going to be a little difficult is I can get it right on the middle of 0, but when I tighten the jam nut down, a lot of times what can happen is it can shift. So I'm going to try to hold the tie rod as steady as possible as I tighten up the jam nut and hope that it doesn't move the specifications much. So it moved it just a small amount. That's not enough to really be too terribly concerned about. You can compensate by turning the tie rod in or out just slightly in the opposite direction of how it's going to pull when you tighten it, so that way when you go to tighten the jam nut, it'll pull the tie rod into a straight location. The other thing that we need to make sure of is we also need to make sure of, once we've tightened this jam nut down, is that our tie rod itself is not bound up, it's not angled over or anything like that. We want to make sure it's nice and flat and in a neutral position so that it can function well. So we'll adjust the right side and then wrap this alignment up. Again, I'm turning the flats on the inner tie rod against the outer tie rod. Move its location. And once we're set where we want to be, we can turn our jam nut in. And we can hold the flats on the tie rod while we lock down the jam nut. And make sure the tie rod's nice and straight. All right, so from here we have the rear adjusted, the front adjusted, and we're pretty much completed with this. Now, one other thing to note is you can see all the screens. Just because you're in the green doesn't mean the car is going to go straight. You could still have a tire pull, the core shift inside of the tire causing the vehicle to pull left or right. In your area, you might also have to align the vehicle for road crown and to take that into consideration. So just because everything's green doesn't mean that you're necessarily really good to go. You need to make sure that you're looking at your totals. So in this case, our toe is in the green and our total toe is good. Now our steer head, that's how the steering wheel is pointed. This also needs to be adjusted and make sure that we're in the green. Sometimes this does require you to shift the steering wheel over by adding equal length and subtracting equal length from either tie rod to make it straight. If you have a live axle vehicle, you will have an immediate adjusted for that, but that goes off a different process that we'll cover in another video. So as long as your totals are all good, steering angle SAI, as long as all that's straight, total toe in the rear, and our thrust angle, which adjusting the rear toe has had a good effect on our thrust angle to where our thrust angle is nice and straight. This vehicle should drive down the road nice and straight and true. So at this point, we'd call the alignment done. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna hit print. That's gonna come up with the steer ahead signal. So if this is too far out, then you're gonna wanna adjust the steering wheel straightness. What I personally like to do is I like to, if it's green and on this lower tier right here, I like to leave it be and drive the vehicle, especially if you haven't driven it prior to the alignment, and make sure that the steering wheel is actually straight, and then do adjustments according. You might have to come back on the rack. But after that, you just hit the print summary. That's gonna bring up the before and after measurements that you're then going to give to the customer or keep for your own records. Now, one of the things when taking the car off the rack you need to do is you need to remember at this point to take off the alignment heads. This particular alignment rack, you can't get that far, you'll actually crush them, but I have seen where you have the wheel clip-on style that lock onto the wheel. I have seen technicians drive off with those on, which can be a very expensive mistake. These are not cheap to replace. So you wanna make sure all the alignment heads are off. You wanna make sure that you've now gone through and pinned your turn plates. You also wanna make sure too, to collect your tools. This is the biggest thing I see techs do, is they leave their tools on the alignment rack. So much so that we have an area up in the front where if I find someone else's tools, I place it there, try to be courteous. Just doing that kind of stuff to make sure the alignment rack lives a long life. And then again too, that you don't lose your stuff, because it's very easy to forget what you've, your tools that you've been using while you've been working on the vehicle. So at this point, we'll remove all the alignment heads, lower the vehicle back down onto the ground after we've lifted it up off the locks, and then return it to the customer. We'll go into some more in-depth alignment adjustments on some different vehicles in a future video, but I do appreciate you taking the time to watch, and I will see you in the next one.